we've only got half hour for the next session, so I want to move along fairly quickly. And I'm going to introduce to you core members of the ARC team. Actually, I'm going to invite 3 of the 4 members to come up. The 4th member, who we really wanted to float the ARC, was Noah, but Noah's not available because he's otherwise engaged. Noah, where are you? Are you at the back? So stand up. Does people know we have Noah in the house? Stand up. Okay. Unfortunately, he's not available. But what we do have, and it's all of you members of the Sisterhood of Supply Chain, put your hand up. If you are a lady lady logistician, a sister of supply chain, Kelly Hamblin. Anyway, we've got some representation for you today because the first member is going to come up is Azuka. She is a 20-year veteran. She must have started as a teenager. She is leading the supply chain work as part of the Nigeria ARC, and I'm very happy to introduce her onto the stage. The next person I'm going to introduce really needs no introduction because you've seen a lot of him, and that is Ibrahima. And as he walks up, I will share with you and a round for Azuka as well, please.
Let's keep it lively.
I will share with you that one thing that you don't know, Ibrahima is fluent in Chinese. So if you need to take the ARC to China, he's your man.
Absolutely.
And then finally, Trip is going to come up. He's the 3rd member of the team. And Ibrahima, over to you.
Why are you sitting? We're going to stand and keep it lively, Azuka, isn't it? Excellent. Well, there will be no music, no singing, no dancing, unfortunately. But I promise if you join us tonight, we may find a spot where we're doing some singing and dancing tonight. What we'd like to do is really introduce this new initiative called the African Resource Center. And to do that, I'm delighted to be joined by these 2 characters that I've been dealing with for the past couple of months. But just to say a few things on the background before I get into in terms of what's our business model. And I'll ask the presenter to basically show one slide that we're basically going to talk through. I think what's important to mention in the business model is that thanks to the Gate Foundation and a number of donors, for the past 2 years, and WBI and other players, a lot of people have been wondering what is that we need to do precisely and concretely to make sure that we can help these countries that are dedicated to do something about supply chain. And the model starts where I say, let's understand the market, the demand, before we worry about supply. And what came out from that exercise for the past 2-3 years, in most of the African countries, whether it is Francophone and Anglophone, the demand tends to center around getting the right strategy on supply chain. So you don't actually operate on a transaction basis, but much more on the vision and the big picture. What came out from the demand exercise is really to understand not only you get the strategy right, but do you have the capacity to execute it properly? And most of the countries on the continent, they struggle with the issue about capacity. So this all came out from the exercise looking at the demand. What also came out from the demand is that within the countries, how do we build a pool of supply chain experts to make sure that we work with academic institutions and make sure that we can provide the tools that are required, such as VAN or other initiatives, to make it successful from a capacity point of view. What also came out from the exercise, there's so many donors that are intervening in supply chain within the country. How do we make sure that not only we harmonize and coordinate and bring it together so that the different interventions do not actually create problems as opposed to actually helping the countries? That's what came out from the demand exercise. And then the question then, the other side of the equation is the supply side. There's so many private sector players, best practices, innovation all over the world. So we want to bring that to Africa to make sure that when demand and supply match, it will go in the best interest of the countries that we're trying to focus on. And over the past 2 years, this exercise has been about conceptualizing and designing. Now, ARC is the reality, has the face, has a name, has a location. Is Dakar, Senegal, is Lagos in Nigeria. And you see the guy to my left has the best name of the world, Trip. You know, he's always traveling and supporting all of us to make it successful. So what we'd like to do in the what slide after I explained the demand and supply, was really guiding our work, just to take you through some of the business lines that we have put in place to make sure we are relevant to the countries that we're helping, but more importantly, we can make a difference. So I'll hand over to Ashoka, take us through our business line, and then Trip, you come back and talk about the outcome, what we hope to get out of this exercise. Ashoka.
Thank you so much, Ibrahima. So talking about business lines, I'm going to talk about VAN. What does it mean when we talk about VAN and what ARC does with VAN? Our theory is VAN and then what? When you have visibility, then what? You have this data. What do you do with it? As a country, as a program. Now you have visibility and you're able to do analysis. Then what? What does that mean for your system? How do you use the analysis to inform changes? So with ARC, we decided that in providing strategic support, advocacy, that we have to make sure that the data you have, the analysis you have, inform the decisions going forward. How do you make decisions that bring about transformation? And also with that is, you want to do supply chain transformation, you have to do that based on best practices, just like Ibrahima said. Best practices from the private sector. So I'll talk about our support in Nigeria with the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. I call him my boss. He's one of my big bosses. Dr. Mahmoud is here. So I remember when we were called to support MPHCDA, I went to him and I said, sir, you have a system. There is Navision. You have vision, at least to a certain level. And also you have the likes of Onome, UNICEF, CHAI, working with you to build on that. What are you doing with the data already you have? And he said to me, Azuka, I want my team to love this data. I don't want them to see it as work. I want them to see data analysis as part of, oh, fun. I just want to analyze this and use it to make some decisions. How do you do that with the public sector? How do you get them to love data? So we went about looking at how do they learn how to do basic analysis with the data that they have. Not some partners do analysis for them and they present, but they do the analysis themselves, day to day, not based on the time of reporting. They do that day to day. So I think my colleague here, Paul, if you're here, say hi.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Paul. Where are you? Don't tell me he sneaked out.
Oh, he's
Who is taking my picture? This is sad.
he's going to be in big trouble, Paul.
So anyway, what we did was to say, okay, let's train them on basic analysis. And because we have all said it before, VAN is about people, is about what? Processes. Who are the people involved in this? And it has to be owned by the government. So we went about training working with the team, MPHCDA team, to do those basic analysis. Now they've started analysis. Now they can do some root cause analysis, the gap analysis as mentioned by P&G yesterday. They can do that. Not just at the national level. We're also working with them at the state level. Because it's one thing to do something up there. How does that affect when you go lower? Now we have visibility, we have analysis. What next? We had, it was a privilege to have with us for 3 months a supply chain expert from P&G, Procter & Gamble. He was with us for 3 months. Francois, he became my darling. So anyway, Francois, don't laugh. Francois was with us for 3 months, and he gave us that concept of how do you begin to make changes based on best practices. They plan, do, check, and act. That was his principle. This data you have, when you have your meetings, when the networks come together and we have our meetings, what do we do with the analysis that we've done? How do we use that to make sure that there is availability at the very last mile? From the leadership, having that top-down approach as an ownership. And it was amazing, just to give you an insight to that, what Francois brought about. I think it was, Onome, you were there? Some weeks ago, we were having a meeting. And the state and the team, Dr. Mahmoud's team, they had done this beautiful analysis. And they went out to go and investigate. It was a problem with warehousing. And they came back, and they were making some presentations. And you know those presentations, they bring out pictures that you kind of bring out all the English words, you know. It became a competition of English words. Deplorable, abominable, unacceptable. You know, the English was just firing up and down. And then Onome started clapping. Onome, say hi. You didn't escape. Onome started clapping, and she had this big smile on her face. I was like, what? You see that picture, Onome? And she said, today is monumental because for once, the government team is able to do analysis, then do something about it. They are checking it, and they are about to act. That we are at that stage where they understand what this visibility means. Nobody is teaching them what to do with the data. They are beginning to do analysis themselves and now bringing out issues that they themselves are coming up with solutions. So for us as ARC, that is our success story. That we are able to bring in this whole network, to support the network, to come together to begin to think about supply chain system. It's like being a think tank, that's what we say, independent advisory, where we support the government, where we support the partners, because we don't work in isolation, complementing players in the whole system of VAN. You know, there are the different components, what are the elements there, bringing that together. And then not just coming up with solutions that we think are the best, bringing together best practices from private sector. So that when you are thinking of transformations with VAN, when you are thinking as a government, when you are thinking as a program, how to go about with your VAN, you have to think, VAN is like the direction. You want to strengthen something, that is the direction, the way forward. You need visibility. It's basic. The maturity model we found yesterday. Visibility is at I think you get, what's the model? Is it bronze? That's even high. It's basic. So when you have that visibility, is that you make those changes. You have a clear direction of further support. And you begin to make changes based on best practices. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Azuka. I just wish I have half of that passion, I would be just okay. But just to add to what Ashoka said, thanks to people that I have to recognize in the room. Martin, can you stand up for a second? And Stephen as well, can you give him that? Now, the ARC story will not be complete unless we bring in the Francophone world. And that's why, following the debut and the success in Lagos, we want to actually make sure that ARC is also relevant in the Francophone world. So out of Dakar, I'm leading a team that's basically trying to make ARC relevant to 10 Francophone countries in West Africa, with the challenge of the language and make sure that the knowledge is available in a language people can understand. Thank you to our Senegalese team for struggling to speak English, but that's also a challenge we have in the region. But more important, to make sure that we address the concern of strategy capacities for 10 Francophone countries. And that's why I'm delighted to really lead the Francophone team out of Dakar. And I have this very cool title called the Special Envoy. What it means basically is to leverage on my government experience. I was a minister before in the office of the President of Senegal. To leverage on my donor background. I used to work for the World Bank. To leverage on my experience working for a bank at BNP Paribas. To make sure that we can actually convey the message of ARC across the region, beyond just the technical issues of advocacy and policymakers who will take supply chain more seriously. And that's really what ARC West Africa is all about, working closely with Ashoka to make sure we can learn from your great experience in Lagos, Nigeria. Now, let me pause there for a second and ask the gentleman to my left and talk about the great support he's providing us from South Africa, because it's part of the ARC story as well. Trip, over to you.
Very proud to be working with Gavin here in South Africa. It's one of our flagship examples. You've heard a lot about it. We've heard ARC is a small part of a much bigger system, but to be able to work with Gavin to understand what the strategy here is to bring in local experts who understand, we've heard a little bit from Ed about this, and then to tap into Procter & Gamble expertise, to Unilever, and just to be that catalytic part to help think about how can we inject a little bit of private sector expertise just to think a little bit differently about how we can maybe do VAN. So we've heard a lot about that. I've also been thrilled to hear from Dr. Brana from Mozambique, from Keith in Ethiopia, and a number of you have reached out. So the Southern Africa region will also look to see how can we now take the great work we've done in South Africa, in Nigeria, and West Africa, and start to look at how we can support other countries on this journey as well. I'm looking at Dr. Mahmoud, who we've been working with for a while as well. There's also what we call the support center, which was alluded to, and he talked earlier about demand and supply matching. Our regions were out there at the coalface trying to understand within this ecosystem, how can we add value? What are the needs? What's the demand? On the support center side, we're helping to engage global private sector. Can we start to strike larger kind of partnerships with Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Heineken, Coca-Cola, et cetera? So that way, as we have more and more demand all over the continent, we're able to tap into those local experts. I think it's really important to highlight it's about getting to that local expertise. It's about talking to the bottler or to the local factory or to the local distributor. So these global partnerships very quickly come down to the ground. In terms of global donors, I'm very proud of where we're headed with obviously the Gates Foundation, the Global Fund, with Gavi, and also with USAID. We're having really exciting discussions to expand on the work we're already doing in a number of countries, but also to look at how can we continue to support, enhance these supply chain transformations all over the continent. And for ARC to be a bit of that arm into Africa, to bring private sector, also to bring academia and tap into some of our local academic institutions. And finally, I would say, the support center is here to help in any way we can, to help coordinate our efforts across the continent, to help continue to think about, I don't know where Alphonse is, but to continue to think about how we're going to do capacity building differently than what we've done for years, to continue to push the envelope on private sector engagement and think about new models to really tap into the best practice of private sector. So I'll pause there. I'm thrilled to hear from many of you. It's been great to go around. Really look forward to the next couple of days and helping you however we can chart along your journey.
Thank you, Trip. I think it's very important to describe the way we did it. It comes across like we're this huge organization, thousands of people. The whole purpose of ARC is really to be very mean and lean as a facilitator. We're not an implementing agency or implementing organization. Our role is really to facilitate, be relevant to the governments, be relevant to the players in the supply chain within the countries. And more importantly, if we're not needed, we're not needed. But if we're needed, we can mobilize resources to really provide some support. One good example is in Francophone Africa. One of the first exercises we did a need assessment to make sure in the 10 countries that we cover, whether they have a supply chain strategy. We found out actually 8 out of the 10 don't have a strategy. So our priority for the next couple of months to help them get the strategy right. We also found out that in terms of capacity building, working with academic institutions, there's so much appetite for academic institutions to work with us and have what we call a lecture series so we can actually begin to build a pool of supply chain experts as well. We also found out in Senegal, for example, a lot of donors intervening in the supply chain want to have a platform where they can actually better coordinate themselves. We've been approached in Dakar and say, can you play that role in facilitating the coordination so that we can get something much more coordinated, effective. But at the end of the day, one thing we want to take away, this is not about us. It's about the countries, it's about the people, and to make sure that access to health commodities is available all over the continent. And if we have that impact, we've done our job. Everything else is about process and organization. And I cannot finish without recognizing my good friend David Charlie. You have to stand up, man. I have to recognize you. David has been pushing this behind the scene to the extent that now we call ourselves a one ARC family, trying to be relevant from Nigeria to West Africa, obviously to the rest of the continent. So that was really the purpose of our presentation. Tell you that we exist, this is what we do, and hopefully we'll be relevant to all of you going forward. Ashoka, you want to recognize maybe somebody?
You said it all, but just to say that we don't work in isolation, it's a complement. For instance, a lot of the things we've achieved in Nigeria was in working with Chai Eguma. I didn't forget you, darling. So working with Chai and...
Give a round of applause, Chai.
We always try to make sure that people understand our role, that we're here to complement efforts. We're here to make a business case out of investments already in the system to drive efficiency, the lean system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashoka. Thank you. David, over to you.
Things just to call out. So there are some other ARC members in the House. So can we ask you to introduce your team members? Where's Pretty?
Pretty, yes.
Pretty is standing there.
Alexander, stand up.
Alexander, stand up. And Paul is in the house as well.
Paul,
Paul
are
in
you
the
here?
house.
Paul's in the house.
We've also got Ed Llewellyn as an ARC affiliate, as we call it, and Maeve Magner at the back there, and lots of experts who are helping us all over the
And Stephen, stand up.
And we
for
shouldn't forget
supporting the
Stephen.
process.
Yeah.
Hard to forget our friend Martin from
Of
P&G Gates Foundation.
So one thing I didn't catch was the academic piece. So can you say, if we have a few minutes, talk Azuka first about the MIT work, and then maybe Ibrahim or Stephen can say something about the work that WDI are doing.
Okay, so if you looked at our processes or our business model as ARC, you find that we try to address three key things. Being an independent strategic support to public sector, also promoting private sector partnerships, that's bringing private to public, that collaboration. But also we look at the big piece of capacity building. Not just the short-term capacity building, not just where you bring in people to come and train the people on ground, but we're looking at the long term. How do we ensure that in countries like Senegal, like in Nigeria, that you have a system where people can be trained as supply chain experts? And then we don't need to fly in people like Trip that travels a lot to come and do trainings. So in that we have a partnership with MIT to see how we can set up an institute together with some universities in Nigeria to set up supply chain institutes so that in the long term we can have people graduating as supply chain experts. So it's not just going to be pharmacists who are doing supply chain, but engineers come out as supply chain experts in Nigeria and they can work in the public health space. So these are some of the things we're doing in that area just to make sure that ARC becomes a very relevant resource center for supply chain in the countries.
In addition to the work that's happening in Nigeria, what the William Davidson Institute is working on in Senegal is with an African business school called the Institut Africain de Management. And so, and with Ibrahim's team looking at how this university can really make a long-term play for supply chain talent in Senegal, but also for the region. And we really believe that it's about being able to build IIM's ability to have a curriculum, a delivery, and engagement with their private sector so that this next generation of supply chain professionals coming out, which is a 5 to 10 year game that we're playing, and we hope to see the results from, will be really high impact. We truly believe, as Azuka said as well, that this is not just about public health supply chain and making sure that we have enough people, but that for public health needs, but really to be able to say that supply chain as supply chain is important to invest in and get that talent pool in place. Thanks.
What I will just say, in addition to what Stephen has mentioned, while we're building the masters and PhDs, in the meantime, we've launched an institute called a lecture series on supply chain. And what it does is to bring in professionals like yourself to come and share your experience with folks in the supply chain in West Africa. And the idea is, in addition to professionals like yourself, is really to showcase the case studies and transformation that some of these players in the beginning are going through so they can learn from each other. So any of you who have something to share with us, I've been knocking on your door to bring it to West Africa so you can talk to us.
And I definitely want to recognize earlier, this week we had a conversation with Dr. Pillay from the National Department of Health and with Lisa from the World Health Organization. There's already here a vision to have a center of excellence, to really tap into, South Africa's got so many institutions doing so much in the areas of supply chain. How do we tap into that, not unlike what we're doing in private sector, but looking at longer term policy change, longer term research, thinking about new models of supply chain, some of the policy questions that were brought up. So looking at how do we tap into WITS, and there's some interesting conversations already underway. University of Stellenbosch, the very first master's student, Emma, up here in the front row, looking at some policy questions as it relates to VAN. So early days, but thinking about how can the ARC support the vision of the National Department of Health to develop a center of excellence, tap into all the great work that's happening and really progress the agenda with private sector, but on a longer term basis as well.
Fantastic. So we're nearly at time. I've got a couple of administrative announcements to make. We'll take one burning question, and then we'll go to some.
Oh my goodness.
Was it all planned? What is that some of us? We feel left out here, Ashika.
It's just interesting to know what your strategy for capacity building is in Nigeria. I mean, given the fact that we have realized that we have issues with accountability at the lower levels, what's the strategy around that?
Okay. So, I had mentioned the long-term strategy, but I'll tell you about the short-term. For now, what we're doing now with capacity building is that we're leveraging on the private sector. We have now a partnership we're working on with Novartis to set up a one-year training program. It's like quarterly trainings that they do for the government within the state, the people working on supply chain within some specific states. Then after that, at the end of that 1 year, we're liaising with P&G to do like a traineeship, whereby we plant government sector into a private sector organization to work with them for a year. At least for now, we have one person from MPHCDA that will be working with Procter & Gamble for the next 1 month. We really feel that there's a lot for us to learn from the private sector, and that's why we're going by that route, using the private sector to coach and mentor. And also, I know why you're asking me this question, Egwem. I know why. So, for instance, in Niger State, yes, I know.
It's you.
In Niger State, where we know that data management, so to say, is on the purview, the support that CHAI is providing to the state. We as ACK, what we do is to work with your team at the state level to find out how they are doing that and to complement effort. So in essence, it's still on your table to train the state, but we'll work with you to see that get.
Thank you very much.
So thank you to the three of you. Thank you to all of the participants.